over 32 months, Russia has waged war on Ukraine, and today we'll examine the military situation. I'm Julian Rebke, and you're watching the BILD Situation Room. And we want to take another look at the battle for the Donbass. Russian troops have been advancing further there for months now, and we have chosen two small villages that have fallen to the Russians in the last few hours, in the last few days. We'll examine the tactics that Russia is employing to advance in those areas before we then consider how the Ukrainians are trying to mount a defense. The initial footage that we're observing comes from Novo-Lagezentrum. Now, Novo-Lagezentrum is a small village located close to the area of Selidova. Once again, we witness the significant and widespread destruction inflicted before the Russian troops are able to make their way into this place. So we observe here that with artillery and rockets, each individual house is almost systematically set ablaze before. Coming from Selidova, as we clearly see here, the mine-protected vehicles then proceed to roll along the railway tracks heading towards the west and subsequently penetrate the village. These images show us once again how challenging it is for the Ukrainian army to defend, simply due to the immense Russian firepower. We also keep seeing that the Ukrainians are indeed trying to stop the Russians. So even in the Russian propaganda footage, which consistently aims to showcase their strength, we can see constant impacts happening right next to their own transport vehicles, besides their own vehicles moving in the direction of the west. Nonetheless, a majority of these vehicles ultimately manage to advance into Novo-Lagezentrum, and they succeed in driving the Ukrainians out from that area. We're seeing once more, and this remains a persistent issue we often highlight, how Russian soldiers exit in large numbers from their vehicles. That's approximately 10 soldiers per vehicle who disembark and then proceed to move towards the surrounding forest ridges near the villages with the aim of driving out the Ukrainians. And several of them head directly towards the Ukrainian positions too. Promptly proceed to enter the houses right there. This is a Russian propaganda video. We see the coordination. They try to show us how everything proceeds systematically, how you can tactically organize it all very well. Nevertheless, here we always observe all these gestures as if they're winning this battle. However, the reality is that the Russians require a significantly extended period of time, that they lose many soldiers to get in there, and we keep seeing that the Russians are not at all uncomfortable showing that all civilian houses are being destroyed before entering, so that no buildings or structures in the area are intended to be repurposed or utilized to build a life there or anything like that, but rather that everything is destroyed first before going in. In the end, we see what you might call the flag ceremony. That means the Russians want to show once again, often at monuments commemorating the Great Patriotic War, as it's called in Russia, to remember the Second World War. Show that they have once again advanced westward and that they have taken another part of Ukraine, in this case have led to the capture of the small village of Novo-Lagezentrum. We'll take a closer look at the map to see that all these efforts we've just seen, artillery, rockets and ground troops, have ultimately led to the Russians successfully advancing further in the area near Pokrovsk. Because Novo-Lagezentrum is another place that brings them further west. And now it's only 21 kilometers away from the border to the neighboring oblast in the Dnipro region. What we just saw were recordings from this small region here, meaning this village Novo-Lagezentrum. Maybe you can also see the lake in the distance. That was it, which we just saw in the footage. And there they managed to advance further west from Selidov, which was conquered about 2 weeks ago, and to establish a foothold, making it impossible for the Ukrainians to recapture Selidov. Looking a bit further south to Antonivka, it involves a different strategy, well, a similar strategy of fire superiority and also the massive deployment of troops, but from different weapons that the Russians are employing to advance forward here. We can observe 2 ground attack aircraft of the Su-25 model, flying towards Antonivka and at this moment launching their unguided S-8 rockets exactly targeting Antonivka. We observe that they are quite accurate in their targeting. While they aren't precision tools, they possess quite a vast number, with each container housing 24 rockets, providing them the capability to cover and effectively target a large area. We are sure that the Ukrainians are positioned at the town's western edge. In that exact area, we can observe approximately 10 to 15 explosions resulting from the rockets that were launched. And this entire situation is, of course, for the Ukrainians, you can maybe imagine, an absolute horror, because they are sitting in these houses, they sit in these areas trying to defend them and wait there for the Russian army. But before the initial Russian foot soldier even arrived here in Antonivka, hundreds of rocket bombs had already struck various areas around Ukraine, which had to endure all the relentless fire first. Only when the Russians believe they have destroyed a large part of the defense here, only then do they move in. We now see larger bombs being used here, probably FAB 500, and they are naturally much more accurate than before. That means we don't have a wide spread of impacts, but they are concentrated in a small area, as seen here again. But on a small area, quite a few impacts, in this case even 5 or 6 impacts just on a few square meters. And if there was a Ukrainian defense position located in Antonivka, then it was most likely destroyed in the course of these attacks. This demonstrates the firepower, the air superiority that the Russians are using alongside these human waves, alongside the fact that thousands are being sent to their deaths to conquer all these villages. Because, and this is no big surprise, here we see it now. At the end of the assaults, the vehicles arrived, the mechanized attack. Because what I also wanted to say is, some of the Ukrainians, of course, survived that. The positions are very well fortified, and when the bombs come, you quickly head underground for shelter, remaining prepared to continue the fight. Moreover, the Ukrainians have obviously set up a multi-layered defense. That means while mainly these infantry soldiers in the front rows are being bombarded, behind them are the drone pilots and artillery units continuing to fire, and they are also defending their own position here. Nevertheless, we see in the end the Russian tanks roll through Antonivka and, according to our information, have now largely captured the village. Let's take another look at the map to understand that we're positioned a bit further south here, yet it's still within a region where the Russian army is definitely determined to advance and make progress. And Antonivka is situated quite close to Konstantinivka and has, as previously mentioned, most likely been largely or even completely overtaken by the Russian army over the course of the recent days. We want to move a bit further north to the small locality of Elinka. This is the last settlement before reaching Bereski, where the Ukrainian army finds itself under significant pressure as Russian units have advanced into the area as well. Interestingly, however, they have initially only moved in with infantrymen, and these infantrymen in this particular situation are facing a significant challenge because Ukraine is defending themselves with a Leopard 2 tank that has been supplied by Western allies. We can observe here on the left side where there's a brief glimpse of the tank. It's using a variety of weapons to repeatedly shell the houses occupied by the Russian army in Elinka. He probably used his main cannon. Yes, quite a lot of firepower which he uses, but he also repeatedly uses his onboard machine gun to fire at these houses. And this once again highlights the major problem the Ukrainians face. Yes, they have modern technology, they have received tanks from the West, but they use those tanks to shoot at infantrymen. And that's already a pretty strange relationship and naturally nothing in the manner this tank was originally meant to be utilized, but it's genuinely designed for significantly different kinds of battles. Now he has to operate in urban combat, constantly driving past this Russian-held house and firing at it from all possible positions. It's also interesting how quickly he can retreat again. He has a strong advantage over the Russian tanks in this aspect. We see it moving backwards again. Russian tanks can only go in reverse at speeds of 5 to 20 kilometers per hour, while this German, or at least German-made tank, operates differently. Can reach up to 3 times the speed, which he can also drive in reverse. And that is, of course, something that quickly brings him out of this dangerous situation. A few kilometers to the north, Novoselidivka was also defended by the Ukrainian army. In that location, they deploy not only armored vehicles, but also infantry soldiers along with a substantial number of drones. We're going to take a closer look at the battle for this specific place. We observe a Ukrainian vehicle as it moves in, making its way towards Novoselidivka, driving in an eastward direction here. This suggests the Ukrainian army from time to time makes attempts to use both men and vehicles for their ground defense. Yet there are significantly too few resources available to them. Despite that, this video is intended to demonstrate how they make attempts to defend Novoselidivka in a relatively successful manner. Here we see the Russian soldiers who are in the town, and then we see the large Ukrainian counterattack being launched, yes, with a variety of different weapons. We repeatedly see Russian soldiers under attack, individual ones of them also end up getting killed, and then after the Ukrainian fire, which primarily comes from drones, one must say, also some artillery, but especially drones, as we observe up here, the Ukrainian soldiers proceed and attempt there to liberate the various houses that have been occupied by Russian forces. Nonetheless, one must honestly admit, it's merely a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of things. This means that a single village is selected here from about 10 villages that unfortunately get lost each week to the Russians in this region. And there they are trying to put up resistance. They're attempting to locally halt the Russians and perhaps even forcefully drive them away. But the whole thing, as I just mentioned, is a bit like a drop in the ocean, even though Russian tanks and numerous Russian soldiers are, of course, repeatedly killed in the process. Overall, the Russian army continues to advance forward, although it is not progressing as quickly as it might have been about 2 weeks ago. In this push, some men were lost. This requires a couple of weeks to regroup and recover, bringing fresh soldiers to the front lines before advancing further west from the captured positions, ensuring readiness while minimizing setbacks. We want to watch another video from the Kharkiv region. We were just in Donetsk, and we see there that the Ukrainian drones, especially those of the 92nd Brigade alongside the Achilles Battalion, have achieved a range that significantly surpasses that of Grad rocket launchers, as well as these weapons we can observe here. The ones being targeted are the so-called TOS-1A rocket launchers, officially referred to as flamethrowers, which are known to fire powerful thermobaric weapons. They have a range of about 15 kilometers. However, we know that the Ukrainians are now deploying small kamikaze drones with a range of up to 25 kilometers. And these particular drones are being actively used to engage and completely destroy those two TOS-1A systems moving over there. We can observe this quite well here. Up here, the rocket launcher is clearly visible from the rear. There are exactly these thermobaric rockets in there which are supposed to be launched. Looks like some are still in too. And down there, they are hotter or brighter in this case. You can see the engine block of the vehicle. And now we see the impact, also from another angle. Interestingly, the Russians drive two TOS-1As, one after the other, directly in a row. That means they didn't expect to be attacked so far behind the front line at all. Nevertheless, the Ukrainians effectively managed to successfully spot these Russian TOS-1A launchers and then went on to strategically attack and engage both of them, one following the other. We must admit there's no thermobaric explosion, so we don't see a large blast. The rockets likely did not detonate, but both of the vehicles were definitely struck for sure. We witnessed the explosion on both vehicles, which clearly demonstrated to us that considerable damage was done to at least the machine, and consequently affected both of these vehicles involved. Rocket launchers cannot be used for now. As mentioned, the crucial aspect of this scene is that it most likely occurred 15 to 25 kilometers behind the front, also happening at night. And this shows how some brigades and battalions of the Ukrainian army are developing increasingly modern drones, or their Western partners are sending them more modern drones that they subsequently deploy against the Russian army. In conclusion, we would like to watch a particular video showcasing the Ukrainian air defense capabilities, and this is increasingly about defending against drones with drones. We've been seeing this phenomenon for several months now, but it keeps showing us these constantly reappearing videos here. The framework of an Orlan-10 drone from the Russian army, followed afterward by yet another one, and numerous Sala drones. That Ukraine is systematically conducting these operations, strategically deploying small quadcopters to, as we observe here, at several kilometers of altitude. Successfully shoot down Russian surveillance drones with a remarkable accuracy of just a few centimeters. This effectively ensures that, to ensure safety on the ground for the troops. Let's revisit the first video, as it shows clearly why it's crucial to effectively bring down these surveillance drones. That shortly afterwards, they are generally followed by artillery fire, missile attacks, or kamikaze drones. The Russian drone pilot decided to be cheeky and humorously wrote on this Orlan-10, as you can clearly see here, "I'm flying a Landsat next," aiming to introduce some levity into the tense situation. That means, after this surveillance drone, I'll come with a large Landsat kamikaze drone with a range of 70 kilometers to attack the target. Yes, that might be the case he does it, but in any case, this drone is no longer used. We can definitely comprehend why it's crucially important for the Ukrainians to make sure these drones are taken down. We can also observe that the Russians are increasingly approaching the situation with a bit of humor, definitely, and even the Ukrainian drone pilots aim to convey a message that even if you bring them down and cause a crash, they continue to remain steadfastly resilient. We have a multitude of extra drones fully prepared for continued attacks on your land in the aftermath.